The heavenly demon is about to rise. For years at this point, the greatest puppet master in all of One Piece has been chained up at the bottom of the ocean, waiting for chaos to finally consume the world. Well, guess what? The demonic ruler of heaven is now waging a crusade right now in the land of giants, and he needs more power. He now needs another holy warrior ready to take up arms and cut down the next Joy Boy. And only one man truly fits that role better than anyone I know about in the story. It's time for the return of Donquixote Doflamingo. So I'm just unbelievably confident that more than any other character we've met throughout Luffy's journeys, Doffy is just destined to return during the Final Saga in some way, shape, or form. And the main reason for that is, of course, that he has a pretty undeniable threat that connects him to none other than Zawardo Saint Nerona Imu, which becomes just like very clear when you actually go back and reread Dressrosa. Like, just without context, during that arc, Doflamingo looked like the final boss of One Kingdom. This ultimate combination of pirate and celestial dragon that nobody could touch. But as I actually look back at it and the entire arc, it's really clear, I think, that Oda's entire purpose with Dressrosa was to quietly use Doffy as a tease. He's honestly a full-on introduction to Imu himself, which I think is going to become really clear to you when you actually look at the order of events there, right? The next major world event after Dressrosa was the Reverie, where we were first introduced to Imu. And while Luffy is off saving Sanji in Whole Cake Island, the world is experiencing some massive fundamental change. Dressrosa's ties to Doffy made it the turning point for dissolving the entire warlord system altogether, a matter to be decided at the Reverie after our Feather Boa boy got sent to prison. He did not get to go over Go. He went straight to Impel Down. Now, of course, the most notable part of the Reverie is that it's the arc that we learned about Imu in to begin with, right? And you know who Oda uses as a means of introducing Imu to us to begin with? That's right, none other than Big Mingo himself. Bound in heavy chains, worried about being assassinated, Doffy, out of anyone possible in One Piece, is chosen to show us the king of the world. And that, of course, makes a lot of sense, right? Because even before we knew that Imu ever existed, Doffy was already kind of talking about the hidden rulers of the world during Marineford. He also teased this existence of this national treasure of Mary Geoise, claimed that someone was terrified of what he knew, and he even suggested that if he ever possessed the Ope Ope no Mi years ago, he could have just seized ultimate control and authority over the entire world. Which, to me at least, makes it kind of seem like Doffy had some sort of plan centered completely around taking down Imu. Whether that meant actually just replacing him by switching his own personality into Imu, or stealing whatever power he possessed, swapping bodies with him, or simply just killing Mu after becoming immortal himself through the surgery, we still do not know what that plan was, but at the very least we do know that he wanted to be immortal for some reason. And that reason is very likely tied to Imu and whatever this mysterious treasure actually is. And now, here we are. Imu has stepped off his mysterious throne and made himself public. Sort of, at least. Like, the words that Doffy screamed out have absolutely come to light. Maybe it's about time that the truth comes out. Power runs fast, and it rots just as fast. And well, the truth is out. The Devil King is now whooping giants, pirates, and really anything in between, like Ragnar, poor squirrel guy. And seeing as Imu is now recruiting new Holy Knights, as we saw at the beginning of Elbaph, where they tried to recruit Loki, in case you forgot, what better time is there to bring back this dude? Because we already know that the world government, despite the Don Quixote's cut ties with Mary Geoise, at least Doffy's part of it, there's still like Mjolsgard and people like that, right, from the Don Quixote clan, they're still very much willing to do business with Mr. Flamingo anyways. Like, they allow him privileges that almost no one else receives, they give him direct orders to just kill and assassinate Moria without funneling it through Sengoku. And admittedly, after his capture, the Gorosei didn't end up killing Doffy immediately, they just put him in the deepest, darkest level of Impel Down. So, what's the deal with that? Why is Big Moo keeping the Heavenly Demon around if he's such a security risk? The Heavenly Demon, by the way, again, is like such a great connection between Doffy and Imu, right? Like what at first seems like this perfect nickname for a fallen celestial dragon has now a totally new ring to it once you realize that the king upon the throne is quite literally a demon that reigns over the heavens up in the Holy Land. Because let's be real, there's just no more heavenly a demon than Saint Nerona Imu, king of the worlds. So maybe the reason that he's been kept alive is because Imu knows that Doffy is familiar with his secret national treasure of Mary Geoise. Whether that's gonna be Uranus, the Straw Hat, the Eve Tree, or Lily's weird corpse, I don't know, Imu's a freaky guy, right? Who knows what he has up there? It doesn't fully make sense that this would be why Doffy's still alive, because, like, just kill him, right? And, like, Imu doesn't have a problem killing subordinates, or even worse, people who aren't subordinates who should be. Or at the very least, just Domi Reversi the guy. Like, do something that removes this piece of blackmail off the table. Where they may be keeping him around because he was hunting for the Opi Opi no Mi, something that might have some weirder ties to Imu's flower room or immortality. I actually recently wanted to make a video on Imu's flower room and the Opi no Mi specifically, but couldn't really find enough reason. But I do think it's worth at least quickly mentioning it in this Doffy video because there's totally a chance that Imu is like tethered to the flower room through some Ope Ope shenanigans. Maybe Doffy was useful because he was trying to get them lost powers, something that they'd snatch from him at the right time. But honestly, I don't really know. I think that all of these are potential reasons, sure, but me kind of thinks that Mr. Moo might actually be keeping Doffy around for a completely different reason. As he thirsts for more power and begins to wage war against Joy Boy, who better to fight on his side than someone who not only is a celestial dragon, but already hates Luffy? Someone who is already on board for destroying the world through the greatest war ever. Someone that Imu would be able to string along like his own special little puppet, because the only other choice would be death to him. Makes a lot of sense, right? Donquixote Doflamingo is perfectly positioned to become Imu's spear, I think. Well, actually, we've already seen Imu's spear, this thing. I think if Doffy were to become a Holy Knight and serve Imu, his role might maybe be better described as a lance, and maybe he'll be gifted a lance as well. The lance that the Don Quixote family swore in fealty to Imu during the Void Century. The legendary clan weapon of House Don Quixote. Now, obviously, since we're making a video on Doflamingo after the insane reveals during the Luffy-Imu fight, I just had to talk about whatever holy weapon actually belonged to the Don Quixote clan. Because after Oda finally started explaining all the names of these weapons and started handing them to the descendants of those clans, Summers and Killingham mostly, I just kinda had to try and connect one of them to Doffy. Like, can you just take a moment and actually imagine Doffy with a sick omen ring behind him, using his threats to manipulate a giant lance to pierce through his enemies? It'd be something like a giant sewing needle, and it would be absolutely sick. Now, why do I think it's gonna be a lance? Well, there's of course literally no reason for me to say specifically like this weapon on the left side of the throne image is a lance, and that lance is also the Don Quixote lance. Well, of course I do have a reason to believe that it would be a lance. You just haven't let me get there yet. Chill, homie. Take a breather, pause for a second. Why don't you head over to Patreon, link in the description, follow, maybe throw a couple dollars this way for production. It'll clear your head a little bit. Oh, sick. Great, you're back. Isn't that better? All right, let's keep going here. Now, before anyone starts yelling at me, no, we haven't had Oda come out and label one of the weapons the Lance of the Giant Slayer and said it was the Don Quixote family relic yet. This is all absolute speculation, but, and maybe you already know where I'm going with this, it's not baseless at all when we of course look at Doffy's inspiration. The name Don Quixote obviously comes from one of the most famous novels ever written. The entire image of Don Quixote riding his donkey is something that many people will recognize. And also something that is just inseparable from him is one weapon specifically, a lance. Now, in case you don't know who Don Quixote is, I really recommend reading the story, but here's the short and sweet. In a nutshell, Don Quixote is this delusional knight who dreams of adventure and charges towards impossible battles, lowering his lance as he rides into combat against enemies that don't actually exist. The most iconic of which are, of course, the windmills, which in his mind are these evil giants. And we already know that Oda loves these kinds of literary references, right? Usopp's nose is a tie to Pinocchio, who always lies. Thriller Bark pulls very heavily from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Zorro is obviously Zorro, which I also recently learned since I picked up Spanish again that it means fox, which I didn't know, but kind of cool. Ohara the fox? Hey, so obviously Oda's very well aware in his mind why he chose to name Doffy Donquixote Doflamingo. And so I really don't think it's super crazy to propose the idea that the Don Quixote family's sacred weapon would be based on their namesake as well. And it's actually his connection here that made me really want to talk about Doffy right now during the Elbaph arc, because if all that might be true, the timing of all of this becomes really, really important. Like, it's the perfect time to not only bring Doffy back, but also to give him this family spear. Why? Use your little thinking cap. You've got this. I'll walk through it with you. Where is the story at right now? Elbaph, the Island of Giants, and what did we just say is the premise in the story of Don Quixote? A man trying to prove himself by charging at giants with a lance. I mean, come on, right? Doflamingo's almost inevitable return to the story perfectly lines up with the fact that the Giants of Elbaph are on Team Mugiwara no Luffy, and if I'm Imu, actively invading their homeland and in need of new recruits, wouldn't it be almost too perfect for Oda to just complete this story arc here? Like, seriously, if there ever was a perfect moment for Oda to make that literary connection pay off completely, this would be it. Come on, I'll even double down for you a little bit more. Think about the one thing that Doffy has wanted his entire life, literally. Like, some people say he wants power, and sure, that's kind of true, but where does that desire actually come from? It comes from losing access to Mary Geoise, to the Holy Land, and being cast out as a celestial dragon. Everything in Doffy's life spirals outward from that one decision that his father made. He lost his status, privilege, and identity. He went from being worshipped as a god and having access to everything, all the luxuries and benefits of being a celestial dragon, to being dragged through the streets by ordinary people who wanted revenge. Ruling Dressrosa wasn't his dream. Joker wasn't his dream. Hell, destroying the world wasn't always his dream. Those were all like kind of coping mechanisms, the solutions that he came to deal with the loss of all his status. He believed that the throne was his birthright. So imagine Imu now offering him exactly what he's always wanted. Not forgiveness for spying on him, not freedom because he's a celestial dragon, but an actual place back in the Holy Land as one of his most elite soldiers. One of the top 13 people at the top of the world, right below Imu. Now, this of course begs another question: would Doffy actually accept that offer? I actually think he of course might if Oda wants that to happen. I think it would be a very logical decision for Doffy to make right now, not because he'd suddenly become loyal to the cause or anything. Absolutely not. If there's one thing we've learned about Doffy, it's that he serves only one person, and that's himself. And I guess Kaido, but also mostly himself. But that's exactly why I think he would say yes, because accepting Imu's offer would finally put him back where he's always wanted to be. He'd be back inside Mary Geoise, within reach of the national treasure, and boosted with the power of the Abyssal Pacts, maybe even making him immortal, everything that he wanted. Positioning, of course, Doffy perfectly to eventually do what he really wanted to do, betray Imu, something there also is precedent for because we do know that Imu's top commander, Figgle and Garling, seems to also be kind of moving in his own little special way, opposing the Gorosei. Like, Saturn hid things like Emeth from Imu as well, and would have gotten away with it if it weren't for that pesky new Joy Boy and his reindeer too. Even Summers accidentally destroyed the boat for the kids and was like, well, I just pretend like that wasn't my fault and lie my ass off here. It's possible to serve Imu, in other words, while still being selfish and lying successfully, something that you know damn well Doflamingo would do on the spot. But before we can really dig into what being a Holy Knight might actually look like for him, we should also very quickly cover the other option for the Heavenly Demon's return. Like, without any doubt, Cross-Guild also absolutely deserves to be part of this conversation. In fact, if Doflamingo escapes Impel Down right after Elbaph thanks to Marco's prison break thing, something that's happening in the manga right now, and then the very next panel is just Buggy welcoming him into Cross-Guild, honestly I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest either. I've been kind of Team Doffy for Cross-Guild ever since Cross-Guild was revealed as a thing, because on paper it just kind of makes way too much sense, right? I mean, let's look who's already there. Buggy, Mihawk, Crocodile. 3 former warlords of the sea, just like Doffy. Cross-Guild has been positioned as this ex-retirement home for the 7 warlord system. I'm fairly certain that Moria's gonna join them because of the Perona Mihawk connection, and you better believe I think that Weevil is headed straight there with Marco after he's freed as well. And just look at what they're doing. The operation's whole goal basically is recruiting powerful outlaws, placing bounties on the heads of Marines, and creating an organization where the world government's enemies become one big united organization. And Doflamingo fits that mold almost perfectly. He's another former warlord with direct ties to the underworld, a massive name that people would recognize and fear, and he's obviously also got a big reason to hold a massive grudge against the world government. So if he breaks out of prison, Cross-Guild is probably one of the safest places that he could possibly turn to, and selfishly, I'd kind of love to watch that. Generally, some of my favorite moments in One Piece are when the warlords would unite and just, piss each other off immediately. Just comedically alone, I would just love to see Doffy, Crocodile, and Mihawk just interact more and trying to, run an organization together. But honestly, there's also a much bigger reason that I hope Doffy joins Cross-Guild, and it's because I think that there's one dude who might end up working for them soon once he makes a recovery. Trafalgar Law. Another former warlord in desperate need of a home. And can you just imagine those two being forced to try and cooperate together? After everything that happened on Dressrosa, after Corazon, I don't know, I kind of feel like seeing Doffy and Law temporarily fighting together would be so uncomfortable and really sick at the same time, you know what I mean? Especially because their powers would kind of work absolutely disgustingly well together. The Ope Ope no Mi and the String Fruit, think of all the crazy shenanigans you could do with that. Law changing the strings around in his room, and there's so many cool things you could do. But I kind of keep running into the same problem in my mind here. It kind of feels like it won't really fulfill Doffy's story as well as the other point, right? The Cross-Guild is a pirate organization, and Doffy has never really been about piracy. Yeah, he is one, I'm gonna get that, but you and I both know that he doesn't really like it. He doesn't really respect the hustle, is what I'm saying. And every single one of his biggest mysteries just points towards Imu, towards the Holy Land, and I do think that Oda really has something much bigger planned for the Heavenly Demon than just Cross-Guild. As cool as it would be, it should be the Holy Knights. But is that what he actually wants? Because really, the kind of biggest question for will Doffy join the Holy Knights is, what does Doffy actually want right now? And will allying with Imu actually accomplish that for him? We've already covered sort of what his goals are. He wants to watch the world burn in response to his upbringing. He's unbelievably obsessed with power and taking the empty throne that would allow that and regaining his lost status, all that stuff. Which does set Imu up to be his perfect leader during the endgame. And here's why. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Final Saga is slowly becoming the exact kind of world that Doffy has always talked about. Back at Marineford, remember, he laughed about the coming age, saying that justice would change depending on who actually stood victorious, that the winners would define what justice even meant. Doffy at his core was already back then being incredibly cynical, revealing sort of the inevitability of the entire series. And guess what? He was right. We're literally watching the rulers of the world march across the seas, erasing kingdoms in like 1 second and attempting to rewrite history in real time. Sorry, Scopper, your arm was deleted by the king. There's no revising that one. What ultimately matters, though, is that the world that Doflamingo dreamed of is here right now, and ironically, it was his people who created it. Imu is already burning the world. If Doffy allied with Kaido due to his promise to bring about the next Great War, then the next most logical leader for him would be Imu, the true heavenly demon, because in reality, Doffy's kind of a discount Imu, right? The devil is already doing everything that Doffy ever dreamed about from the throne that Doffy could never reach. It's kind of bound to drive him insane, right? How could someone live his dreams so dominantly? And what would he have to do to become them instead, right? So this final war is the exact kind of chaos that he's always wanted to be a part of. The balance of the world is collapsing, and it's time to start throwing monsters into the mix, and Imu's best chance at defeating the likes of Luffy, Shanks, Loki, etc. is gonna be bolstering his own Holy Knights and who they are. He knows this, that's why he wanted Elbaph and also Loki on his side, and from Imu's perspective, Doffy kind of checks a lot of the boxes for his perfect soldier. He's already pre-Omen and pre-any shenanigans and contract and abyss powers absurdly powerful. He uses Conqueror's Haki. He already despises the new Joy Boy, and he's a celestial dragon worthy of one of the 19 founding blades. And realistically, Imu needs more pieces on the board. 13 Holy Knights and the 3 Admirals are not gonna cut it when dealing with Luffy's crazy army that he's been building. We're talking about Yonko, Revolutionaries, Warlords, Supernovas, and like more and more just alike. Luffy's ever-growing militia is getting really scary and really threatening at this point, and as Mihawk put it during Marineford, it is Luffy's greatest and most terrifying power. So for Imu to have a real chance once characters like Teach, Dragon, and Shanks start moving against him too, he does need some top-tier fighters that can deal with the non-Nikas of the world too. Doffy is just perfectly cut out for exactly that type of work, and also from Doffy's POV, it's just a win-win. Like, he's gifted with status, insane powers, potentially access to things like the National Treasure and Immortality, or the fancy weapons allotted to all the Holy Knights, but he also gets to actively destroy the world for Imu to then reshape. In a way, this is a chance at restored honor, an offer that has never been on the table for him before. I'd at the very least like to see him get the opportunity to determine if this is the best course of action for him or not. So assuming that he does get this offer and chooses it, you know, I guess the other option would be death then. Who would he actually serve a purpose against? Who will Doffy fight as a Holy Knight? And well, I can kind of think of 3 fellas right at the back of my head that would work perfectly. Let's start with Sanji. I think that some people forget the unbelievably one-sided Sanji versus Doffy encounter that we got during Dressrosa. You remember that one? Like, we watched Sanji throw everything he had at Doflamingo, and Doffy barely looked inconvenienced as he wrapped him up with his sick parasite technique. Doffy tier is the level I absolutely, like, even less that I expect Sanji to reach by the end of the series. I want him to be way stronger than that, and especially now it feels like it's achievable for him to get that salty run back. Since their previously low diff, Sanji has awakened his Germa enhancement, allowing him to unleash Ifrit Jamba, massively improved his Haki, and is on the cusp of becoming a conqueror, and his new flames might be perfectly set up to dismantle his strengths, especially if they get that crazy Omen boost. But another surprisingly good choice here would, I think, be Loki. Like, let's see if Birdcage can contain the Nidhogg, I know that at first this one feels like the biggest reach, but it's arguably the most thematic also. I think you just kind of need to remember the Don Quixote part of Doflamingo once again, because if Doffy really does become Imu's lance, and if the Don Quixote family really is symbolically tied to the lance carried before the empty throne, then having his first major opponent post-Holy Knighting be a mythical giant would be the final tribute to this inspiration. The original Don Quixote spent his life imagining himself charging giants with a lance, and now through Oda, Don Quixote Doflamingo could be given the chance to actually drop the spear down ride in on a stringy horse, and pierce the heart of the mighty prince of the giants. Now, one small problem here, or well, I guess one good thing for Team Good Guys, Loki probably still folds him even after Holy Knighting him. I mean, like, honestly, it would be nuts if Doffy actually wins that interaction, but I do think giving him an Abyssal Covenant, immortality, and an Omen boost, and a sick power on top of it might just be enough for it to be a believable fight, if not just a thematic one. But of course, when it does come to Luffy's super broken allies, we all know who Doffy should actually deal with during the final war: Trafalgar Law. I mean, like, come on, dude. You know Oda has to be thinking about it. Law is alive, Doffy's alive, they haven't truly fought since Law gained powerful hockey upgrades and a Devil Fruit awakening. Like, this is the real clash we've been waiting for. This is the salty run back of my dreams. Think about it. Law's entire life has been shaped by Doflamingo, Corazon's death, the destruction of Flevens, the revenge that consumed him for over a decade or two. All threads lead right back to the Heavenly Demon. And I mean, yeah, like, Law technically kinda got his revenge during Dressrosa with Luffy's help and Luffy punching Doffy into the ground. But if Doflamingo returns with even more power behind him, surely he just crack his knuckles and create a room and try to leave Doffy in shambles. I really can't imagine that Law would be too thrilled about needing Luffy to defeat Doffy, and I think now would be his time to get that true revenge that he's been seeking. And I don't think that anyone would actually complain about one final showdown between these guys, right? Like, I can't claim to know Oda's plans for Doffy, but here's what I know. Oda has spent over a decade connecting Doflamingo to Mary Geoise, the Celestial Dragons, the National Treasure, immortality, and just Imu himself. So if you ask me, I think it's finally time for the man in the feather boa to become one of the true Heavenly Demon's 13 commanders during the final war. And if you want to see who else I think will act as Imu's stalwart guards during the final war, who they will fight, and the thematic reason behind it, you should check out this video where I dig into who will be on Team Luffy leading the charge, and who will Imu throw in their way instead. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, thanks so much to our fantastic Patreons, again, link below if you want to support us, and otherwise, have a fantastic remaining day. I'll see you in the next one.